Hello, thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome to everybody. I'm really happy to curate these conversations as a way to bring our embodiment practices out into the world to affirm life, to affirm the life of our body and the life of the planet that we share with the more than human world. So, before we begin, to take a brief moment of somatic attention. And to preface that with saying that one of the greatest gifts that we can give each other and the planet is the fullness of our attention. And attention these days, of course, as we all know, has gotten very fragmented, dispersed, multitasked, constant distraction. And so simply that you all are showing up today to be in circle with us through this medium is a great gift. So I want to thank you for your attention. That's part of the reason we're also disabling the chat for the duration of the conversation until the end, to simply really relax into our mutual electronic presence. Mm-hmm. So to begin with, simply like you to take a moment to bring your attention inwards, to close your eyes and place your hands on the front of your belly. So to gather your energy and your attention as your hands make contact with the movement of your belly. Connecting with the breathing belly. Simply expressing itself with each inhale-exhale cycle. And then sliding your hands around to the back of your belly, whether it's the palms or the backs of your hands making contact. To bring attention to the back of your belly. And then bringing your hands to the sides of your belly. And then let your attention go wherever it wants to go. So welcome. I want to begin this session to create some continuity with a little recap of our last session. My guest, Michael Jasmin, who's an archaeologist in France. And a lot of what he brought to the conversation for me is this sense of durational attention, committing to a small place of the planet as an archaeologist, spending detailed and exquisite time physically involved in place and perceiving and reading the multiple layers of what's happening in this one place. And we also had Olive Biringa from Body Cartography talking about her piece, Resisting Extinction. And Resisting Extinction is a place that her and her partner, Otto Ramstad, do in different communities for 2 weeks, involving dancers to come for 2 weeks and inhabit a place and really be in that place, get to know it, as a way to then invite an audience in to experience the land, but also with a very provocative meditation of asking the witnesses to imagine their own demise, whether it's through starvation, dehydration, overheating, just one of the many ways that, of course, as we continue along in the ways that we're treating the planet, that we eventually might have to face extinction. So this combination of place-based attention and the human experience is really a way to begin to consider these dimensions of our relationship to the planet. And my guests today are taking it in another direction, very similar, but this idea of how do we have relationship with the more than human world? What does our relationship with other beings not only give us as a focus, but also begin to broaden our awareness of how not only can we be stewards of this place, but also co-creators with other life forms. So I'd like to begin with, first of all, asking Paula Josa-Jones, who's been doing some incredible work with horses over the years. And just, we had a fascinating conversation before, and I got to look at some of her videos, and, that there really is an incredible body of work that you've built. And so I was wondering if you could kind of, first of all, just guide us on a little bit of a timeline of your discovery of horses and your relationship over time. I know that's a broad-based question, but just to begin to...
That's it, right? Then then we're done.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even just evocative moments from that relationship that kind of really give us a feeling for what was touched in you and where that has taken you.
Well, sure. So I'm just gonna read this like a little tiny paragraph. This is from my book, Our Horses Ourselves, because I think it's important, and I think it gives a sense of my origin story with these beings. So this is tiny. From an early age, my hunger for horses was obsessive, like smoke or thick lava seeping into everything, serial ambushes by passion and longing. Black Beauty destroyed me. I read Walter Farley until wild stallions ran through every moment, waking and sleeping. And when those books ran out, I looked for more. I yearned for their bodies, for the smell and the touch of horses. So that's me as a kid, as a child. And then, life and the necessities of life. And I really, my great desire as a child was to dance and to ride, to be with horses. And my mother's great idea was that I take piano lessons. So that's how that went.
Right.
And yeah, and so that that passion, that enormous, like, oh, just at the cellular level, desire to be around these beings was never realized. I mean, the occasional camp and, but then life as it does intervened. And about 28 years ago, by now, I would say, my hips began to fail. As a dancer, catastrophic.
Mhm.
I mean, to the point where, I couldn't really even walk across the street toward the end of that. But as that situation arrived in my life, I thought, oh, well, therapeutic riding, how about that? I wonder if that could restore me in some way. So this is how I came back to horses as an adult, was through my own demise, through the demise of my, my joints. And so that began a long trajectory of exploration and discovery. And, I'm so sensory. I can smell horses right now as I'm talking to you. They're not on my clothes. They're not anywhere, but I can smell them. I can feel their bodies no matter where I am. So I began to ride, and then I think almost immediately my sense was, I don't just want to be sitting on the horse's back. I want to be standing in my own legs and see, how do I read their movement? How do they read that is, after all, our primary language. How do we read each other if I'm not just sitting on their back, telling them, go here, go there? So that became really quickly the kind of the root that sprung the tree of my creative and choreographic work with horses. And that work was really about the deepest kind of listening to what they were expressing, what they were expressing, but what they also could tolerate in terms of proximity, movement, touch, and that sort of refining over the years of working in this way, my sense of them as co-equal, as partners, as part of me, as not separate in any way from me. I call it the common body. That's my language for it. And that's where I live.
Well, there's a very beautiful way that I've noticed that you've kind of brought in the sensibility of body mind centering into this relationship
Mm,
with the horses. And there was a brief meditation I read from your book about the heart and the lungs.
mm,
And as you're
mm,
sitting on the horse, that your legs are kind of like the lungs holding the heart of the horse.
mm.
And I was just really struck by the beautiful image and that reciprocity
Yeah.
of human and horse. And yeah, so that,
Well,
could you say a little bit more about that? Because I think it's so brilliant, that kind of what I call that extension of self into horse, horse into self. And
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, a huge part of the work that I do now, and a great passion, is really informed by, I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. I've been doing trauma-informed somatic work, um, with and without horses over the past, I think it must be almost 14 years now. And so when I'm working with another person and a horse, there's no riding involved, but there is this sense of, how do I might work with the body layers. I might work with, what's the resonance of the breathing. If you place a hand on the horse, how far through your system, how far into your body, where in your body do you feel the cascade of that connection? So it's always about that sense of moving into, but then sensing what is this other being? What is this other being sending into me? The reciprocity of that, the richness of that. And so I just feel like and then of course, every horse that I work with is different.
Mhm.
Everyone is really different.
Yeah.
Yeah. My Andalusian stallion who has departed is really different from the little Mustang mare that I take care of, really, really different from the big blue, who is my co-therapist for most things. So they all have this own kind of essential quality to them. And then how do we feel our attunement with that? How do we open ourselves to what they, in their specificity, are telling us,
Yeah.
are sending to us?
Right.
Yeah. I
Beautiful.
don't know if that answers your question, but
Well, it's just part of the rich flow of information that we
mm,
are transmitting, and through the
mm,
poetry of your speaking,
yeah.
that I get that cascading through, and even the body language we share, of course,
Mhm, mm,
transmits so much.
yeah.
And in that, so I'd like to invite at this point Victoria into the conversation, um, because I'm curious before kind of jumping into kind of your origin story with plants and somatics. If there's anything you want to respond to Paula about what she just shared or what that evoked for you.
Yeah, sure. First, just to give a moment of grounding. Thanks, Jamie, for having us on and having me on this. Yeah, it's a great opportunity, and I appreciate your focus on this topic. And Paula, I think what I was resonating with most is when you brought up the word co-equals. I think that is something that drives so much of what I do. Also, all of these non-human people, persons, beings are equal, and in some ways perhaps wiser than humans. They've been on this planet longer than us, but certainly I think you know humans can have a tendency to be quite obsessed with our own species, and so kind of or thinking that we're better than other species, or we know more, we're more advanced or something. And so just saying we're co-equals. No one's better than another, and certainly no one's needs are more important than another. So yeah, and I love your equality that you're talking about with really listening on a deep level, and that reminds me of a practice with plants. And certainly anyone you talk to who's worked medicinally with plants, who's an herbalist, would very much say it's you're resonating and you're feeling a lot of somatic qualities when you're listening to plants about their medicine. um, so I think that every species there's a bridge for us to engage in communication and deep listening.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
I would like to just say that a little bit of a difference here is I'm working with a 12 to 1400-pound flight animal who is also prey. And so this is quite an important difference in terms of the way that our nervous systems function around that kind of presence, and how quickly it can evoke a sense of fear and a survival response. And that can kind of catalyze this sense of I need to control and I need to be power over this being, which is, I would imagine, quite distinctly different from working with plants.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's almost an inversion of that with plants. Like some there's this phenomena of like the green wall that people just sort of see like it's nature, it's plants, and I need to build this so I can just get rid of all these plants, and there's just like barely noticing them, whereas you can't miss a horse, and it can bring up those big feelings of fear. Whereas I think with plants it's about uh like humbling ourselves, like their lives matter, and um it's worth taking the time to really get specific and learn about them, and not just fall into this habit of just not even really noticing them, caring about them.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting the contrast between the two, the massive presence of horse and, like you're saying, the kind of the subtle presence of plants. And I know that for myself, having spent many years my major movement practice was the ocean and being at the ocean's edge. And of course, that force and entering into the ocean is something very different than my practice now where I live is mostly with trees. And so the difference of quality and attention and what it brings to me in terms of formlessness and form, power and presence is quite different. And so I appreciate you all kind of really speaking to that. So tell us a little bit about your origin story with somatics and plants. So it's like what brought you, what was kind of lit up in you to come to what you're doing now.
Sure. I think I'd like to just mention at least that um, there are some people in my family, like my mom studied horticulture, and a bunch of people in my family are farmers. And so I don't want to ignore that piece of how that can travel through lineages, though my relationship with plants is certainly different than what they've done in their lifetimes. But um, yeah, so even though that is kind of what I grew up around, I had a career in other fields like arts and theater and teaching. And then kind of when I started to transition away from wanting to be an educator, like dwelling inside of an indoor building all day and transitioning from teaching abroad, yeah, I would say I experienced a crisis on many levels, which could be seen as like a time of liminality and a gap in identity. And there, a big calling came in to work more with plants and mushrooms and many other species. And yeah, it's not exactly like a linear story. Because all at the same time, I also got involved with a Buto dance, which I think was a great meeting point for a somatic practice. And Buto has a very interesting lineage with its own teachers in its own right. And a lot of those teachers were inviting us to resonate with, other species or even spirits. And so I think that really opened the door to being interested in this, the realm of the non-human and resonating with through the body in that connection. But I also, in a very material way, I really had a career shift. I started doing eco landscaping and gardening and farming. And I also worked at a holistic psychiatric place in Vermont. And I really loved about that place the way a forestry program and like outdoor education and wilderness skills were such a key piece of that program. And now in the last years, I've transitioned to spending a lot of my time growing native plants and collecting seed, growing them all from seed, and distributing them. And I work for a nonprofit now called Little Blue Stem, and that is something that brings me a lot of joy. And I do somatic work. I enjoy it most in group settings when we're outside and engaging in layers of relationships. Like you've said, it's all about relationships. And so learning how not to only co-regulate with humans, but really co-regulating with all of the other species we're with, and beyond that, like learning how to respect not only each other, but all the other species. And how can we respect that through our quality of presence, but also in a very material way? What are we choosing to do with our bodies in certain places? And how do we use our bodies to interrupt harms in certain places as well?
Can you say something more about that last thing? Interrupting, did you say harms?
Yeah.
Could you speak to that, please?
Sure. Well, so yeah, maybe it'd be useful to say like just example of some harms that happen in different places, such as like pipelines, development, suburban sprawl, pesticide use and herbicide use. Those are some of the big ones that come to mind. I think another thing I would count as harm of sorts is kind of like, I've been using the word amnesia, or like a knowing amnesia, that like there are stories of the place, of the indigenous people whose land that was stolen from them, that want to be known. And if you really want to understand the place, like you really need to learn about those stories. So I think it's a form of harm to engage in that kind of willful amnesia.
Mm.
Um, I'm sure there's other harms that I'm not like coming to mind right now, but those are some of the examples.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your naming them explicitly to understand it. And Paul, I know that part of your work with horses has gone from the relationship with some specific horses to advocacy for horses. And so, speaking
Mm.
of using our body to protect against harms, could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, what Victoria, to sort of follow the line of invisibility that you talked about, that for many people who are not in the presence of a horse, and that's most people, those beings are really invisible. And I think the most grotesque, kind of example of that is what the Bureau of Land Management is doing with the herds of wild horses in the West. And I've worked with a number of horse advocacy organizations. I also have a rescued Mustang who was culled from a herd in Nevada. This is invisible to most people. This kind of harm, the literal running of the feet off of foals as they're being chased across the plains by helicopters into pens, breaking up herds, putting stallions together who shouldn't be together, separating mares from their babies. All of this is invisible. And we have a kind of grotesque amnesia, to take your word, which is a beautiful one, about their presence, which precedes that of the ranchers and the oil people. That our sense of sort of a cultural oblivion, a willingness to forget, is I think one of the most heart-wrenching parts of my witness. Uh, and not just as a horsewoman, just as a being. That sense that we've so devalued these, and of course, many, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but many of these horses that are culled are then either shipped to Canada and Mexico. Let's hope they don't go to Mexico, where they're slaughtered for food. And, a horse, in my experience, the most delicate and refined sensibility. I mean, I know that it's there in cows as well. I'm less familiar with them, but a friend of mine does cow cuddling, and I happen to know that cows have this enormous, resonance for us as well. It's there. We just don't see it. We don't make it available to ourselves. We don't touch into it for, God knows how many reasons, but yeah. So. And again, it's that dominance. We have to dominate the land, the herds. We have to bring that sense of control, and, we lose the relational, collaborative, horizontal, responsive, interdependent, improvisational relationship with that which is other.
I find what you're saying very poignant because, of course,
It's
beyond that,
excruciating.
those of us in this field
Yeah.
know that our attempts to further this idea of collaboration, even with our own bodies, instead of dominating them, forcing them, but
Exactly.
learning to have a sense of responsibility to really respond and listen, and that how much of that is missing in the larger culture. So that very often we are the messengers of that attunement here to
Yeah.
begin to then ripple out in the world. And that's, as we all know, it's a hard path,
Mm.
when so much of the cultural bias is towards form, regulation,
Yeah,
fitting in, following the dominant choreography of culture.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. That's a leading question that I might ask in a workshop or in working with a client or a student is, how are you exerting dominance over your own body? How do you know that? How do you know when you're driving it?
Mhm.
What tells you that? How do you
Yeah.
know that you're ignoring its needs, its desires? Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think still relevant that, in working with plants and what I was mentioning, there's always a story. I mean, ecology is the study of the relationships, and there's always a context to keep in mind. And I love, yeah, the word responsibility is always so present for me. And I think, again, kind of going back to this idea of the colonial settler culture coming in and taking land from the indigenous people and instituting a totally different land management practice, and a different set of ethics around what is responsibility. And that those stories are actually visible in the land. Like, once you start to get to know what are like early successional plans and what are late successional plans, and which plants do you expect to find in places that maybe used to be undergoing prescribed burns by the local indigenous population, and like what does it look like when there used to be burns but there's not burns anymore. Like, so kind of developing that eye for the story and how that relates to cultural shifts, and the colonial wounds that persist in the landscape and in the human population as well. um, yeah.
Mhm. Victoria, I'm curious if you have anything you want to say about your current work with native plants and
Sure.
the importance of that and the
Sure.
and just what perhaps people in our audience can do in relationship to native plants.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll just start with thanks for asking that question, because it is something that I feel so much joy about. And I really, yeah, like it's what kind of keeps me going a lot of days. So yeah, I work with Little Blue Stem, as I said before, and so we focus on local genotype native plants. I'm not sure, that may be a new phrase for some folks, but essentially, if you've been doing any sort of like land tending practices, maybe you're already familiar with this concept of native plants, like as opposed to, say, ornamental landscaping, where you have plants that have been like propagated from elsewhere just for their aesthetic beauty, but like weren't endemic to this place, say, before the 1500s. So anyway, that's what native plants broadly. So we're getting very specific with that, and we harvest seed from plants that are in our bioregion, because those are the plants that have been adapted to thrive here under a variety of climatic conditions, and they're probably going to be the best suited to continue to thrive as climate becomes more and more all over the place. They have that lineage of information to be resilient. But we're also helping them become even more resilient by helping the genes spread. So, for example, it's important for us to collect seed from one place and then grow out those plants and plant them somewhere else. So you're kind of you're preventing inbreeding essentially in the plant population. Um, and as we know, in human populations, that can be not good for overall physical resilience. So yeah, that's the reasoning behind local genotype native plants. Um, And of course, they support all of the other beings. You know, plants are everything. Plants are sustenance and shelter for so many beings and creatures. Not only the pollinators and the birds, but lots of other critters, insects, mammals that would take forever to name. So it is so important for us to tend to creating and sustaining and protecting habitats for all of these beings. So that's essentially why we're doing what we're doing. So yeah, we have a nursery. We grow a variety of plants, and some of them we distribute for free through our various programs with the neighborhood or to other organizations. And yeah, on a case-by-case basis, we may work with private landowners and do consultations and do installations with them as well. But yeah, I think what I love the most about our group is how much freedom we have to be nuanced and full of care in our work, that we really do open the door. I felt so welcome to bring in my somatic experience and my wisdom in that regard. And all of us are interested in medicine and medicine of place and really respecting non-human persons. That quality can be missing sometimes. And like, I really do appreciate, like, anybody who's doing environmental work is doing great, but sometimes it can get very focused on a task and kind of putting blinders on to really staying connected with that genuine relationship in the spirit of the beings. So I'm just so grateful to be a part of the organization.
Sounds wonderful. I mean, and I really get what you're talking about the blinders. And I think sometimes when we're wired for crisis, emergency, it almost feels like we need to keep our eyes on the prize. And sometimes that haste can really push aside that more peripheral vision and holding a larger sense of space and sensitivity. And so
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you're kind of attuned to that. And I think that it's an important element as we move forward as a community in really thinking about how do we participate not only with our bodies and with other humans, but also with place. And how can we each affirm something in, through our action that, like you said earlier, which I thought was beautiful, that this work gives you joy. And right, it kind of
Yeah.
just propels you forward. And I think that quality of joy is so essential as we all find our own creative response. It's like, what gives me joy? What can I really mobilize my energy behind? Because that's going to ripple out in a very different way than if I'm just, you know, pedal to the metal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the joy of being a creature who participates in the landscape. Like, we can fill the role that maybe is missing from other, like buffalo who would have been grazing and collecting seeds in their fur as they go, and like essentially mowing in the ways that we would mow. But like we're filling our mammalian roles in a way when we're really participating with place. Like, I get so much joy. It's just so fun. Like, people who have beards, like, we're collecting seeds and the fluffs just stick in their beard, and we're walking and they're just, it's just naturally happening that the seeds are spreading as we walk. Just
Mm,
feeling like, yeah, we're animals, we're mammals, and we're really embracing that.
yeah. Mm, it's beautiful. Paula, any response or dovetail to that with?
Well, I think the challenge for people who are not in contact with horses, to find this kind of sense of relational inseparability from another being of a very different physicality, whether it's a horse or a garter snake that you find in your garden, or the bees that were making a habitat around our pool in the summer. We suddenly had this whole like little flock of bees that just wanted to be there, and we just figured out a way to like move around them and not to, interrupt whatever they were doing. And they also were very considerate of us. I think that sense of being able to find this sort of, not just co-regulation, but a deeper kind of sense of attunement through the body, through movement, through touch, with a being of any other species. I mean, we have dogs, we have cats, we live in a place that's surrounded by forest. And so I'm kind of bringing my work with the horses, which is, how do I say this? So so unknown and yet so familiar to me.
Mhm.
Unknown in the sense that it is a continuing, expanding discovery for me. I don't ever make assumptions about what I'm going to experience in the presence of a horse, but bringing that to the creatures that are in our lives, and to be able to notice, have I stepped into a kind of managerial posture here? And what is that? How do I track that in myself? I mean, this is where somatic experiencing is such a precious tool, because it really invites this kind of refined sensing of ourselves in relationship. And how do I then shift into this more improvisational, somatically oriented, grounded curiosity? Curiosity, because really that's the fuel. Isn't that interesting? I mean, I remember when I was getting certified in the Tellington T-Touch work, which is this touch work developed by Linda Tellington-Jones, comes out of Feldenkrais, and someone brought a horse to a workshop that was this enormous police horse. And the man was like, just this horse doesn't know what to do when they're trying to move around a crowd, and all kinds of, concerns that he had. And she just looked at the horse and she said, isn't that interesting? And it felt like that just blew a door open, because what I felt in that moment was the breadth of her curiosity and her willingness not to look at a problem, but to look at a possibility and kind of enter that interstitial space of sensing, where can we begin to help here? Where can we start to understand and join and negotiate our relationship here? So, yeah, that.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
Yeah,
That curiosity, right,
yeah,
spurs our creativity
absolutely.
in response.
Mm,
Yeah. And continues to take us into dimensions perhaps we didn't even know were possible.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think really tracking, when did I drop into the managerial spot? When am I just handling things?
Sure.
Some of that is inevitable.
Right.
Some of it, for the protection of everybody.
Hmm.
But then it often becomes a chronic or a default state. It becomes this setting. And I mean that literally in the tissues. And so can we begin to sense that, and sense when we've kind of fallen off that place of connection and softness? Mm. One of my great mentors in the equine world, Mark Rashid, he's a cowboy and a black belt Aikido master, and he talks about connecting the softness inside of ourselves with the softness inside of the horse. And I love, love, love that, and come back to that all the time.
Yes, that tenderizing
Yeah.
that is such a powerful antidote
Mhm.
to the daily violence that we are witness to or experience. It's just how to keep that alive, that
Mhm.
tenderness for ourselves, others, horses, plants. I mean, just I would say it's a huge task that we're all confronted with every day. How to
Mm,
keep the tenderness, the softness alive.
mm,
And as you most beautifully said, and to be aware when we need to be managerial in our life,
mm.
when we need to drop that. How do we shift? How do we shift these worlds? So before I bring to your attention some different resources that I'm going to put in the chat, and then we're going to move into overtime. Those of you who can stay with us and be involved in this conversation. Okay, let's see. Da, 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 da. So the first thing I want to. Okay, I've got all these. Okay. So first off, here's some links from Paula. And this is, while I'm putting the other things in the chat, you want to say something about these three links about your book and your workshops?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote a book. It only took me 12 years. Uh, and I needed every minute of it. It's called Our Horses Ourselves, and the subtitle is Discovering the Common Body, which is what we are talking about. It's available either on my website or from Amazon or from Trafalgar Square Books. Uh, it is as it is as much a somatics book as it is a book about horses. Um, and then in May, I will be doing two equine workshops at a farm in Asheville, North Carolina. One of them is called Somatic Experiencing with Horses, and the second one is a shorter one about dismantling dominance. I'll also be doing some workshops more locally in upstate New York. Those haven't been scheduled for the summer yet. And I do one-on-one work with clients and horses. So give me a call. Happy to talk to you.
Beautiful. Thank you. And
Thank you.
Victoria, I just put your websites in. Could you say a little something about?
Sure. So yeah, the first one is Little Blue Stem's website. So that's the organization in which we do the native plant and ecological education work. And then my personal website is Body Metaspore. And so you'll find quite a lot of articles there, and also documentation of various artistic projects that I've done, collaborations with artists, but also interdisciplinary practitioners. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff to peruse on there. So, and you can email me. I think my email address is on there on the contact page. If you have any reason you want to get in touch, feel free.
Now I'm. Just so everybody knows, I imagine most of you know how to save a chat, so you don't have to copy everything right away. That there's the three dots at the bottom of the
Mhm.
chat where you can save it. So what I'm put in the chat is a bunch of people to follow on LinkedIn. I found LinkedIn to be a very awesome place to understand what's going on in the larger world. And the people that I've mentioned here are all doing amazing work in terms of the restoration of the planet, that are taking it into the bigger idea of how do we steward the land, how do we work with the water, how do we, in a sense, follow and collaborate with the earth body in terms of what it knows to do. So these are just some people, and that's the great thing about LinkedIn is once you start following some of these people and their posts and their reposts, it's like a whole world of just magic and for me at least hope and positive affirmation that yes, this is happening. We don't hear about this enough,
Mm.
and this is my invitation for all of you as a concrete action, which is how to use your own voice to amplify what's happening
Mhm.
whether from our guests today or these change makers on LinkedIn. So, how can you use, for example, Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, whatever you use, and do a link and say, oh, I discovered this person and this is really far out what they're doing and this is
Mm,
exciting, because that's the way that we can each use our own megaphone to
mm,
start generating interest. And just as we can support these people, but also to support our own community, that we really move forward with an abundance of resources to share as a way of creating that ripple. So as a practice for the next week, one, you know, connection a day, that somebody that like really just excites you, post that person and a comment and see what happens. So 7 days of 7 people or organizations, just a really simple practice and see where it takes you.
mm.
So, and then finally, want to, because sometimes in all this, I forget myself. So I just want to bring attention to my work, somatic expression, but also my artwork, nature being art, and what's called long form are videos I've created of the natural world, ranging from 10 minutes to 20 minutes with ambient music just to kind of recenter and remember the earth and our own bodies from an aesthetic lens as a contemplative practice. So, that was a lot of information, but it's in your chat so you can save it. And I want to thank Paula and Victoria for joining me on this exploration today. And I want to thank all of you who I know perhaps may need to leave now for showing up. I appreciate your interest and your attention. And Elizabeth, anything you want to say before we transition?
Thank you, Jamie and Paula and Victoria. Such a rich conversation. I feel like you are planting seeds
Mm.
that may be well underway, growing already in people's consciousness and perhaps in their professional practices as somatic movement
Mm.
practitioners. But for others of us, this may be very new, exciting, um, fertile ground to continue exploring thanks to your generosity today. So, really great gratitude. And if anyone has questions about his metta, I'll just put that in the chat as well. Please reach out if you are not a member of our community and would like to be. You can send an email to info@ismetta.org. Lots of information on the website, board members who are willing to speak with you, etc. So this is part of the richness that we share together in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I just want to put a plug for Ismeta, and I would say a lot of our source foundational work, member representations like body mind centering, continuum, Feldenkrais, all of these somatic disciplines are based on this interconnection with the planet. With continuum, we have the consciousness of water. With body mind centering, the body systems and all the various ways that contributes to our ecosystem. So et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to really acknowledge the member organizations that are really laying the groundwork for that consciousness of body in relationship to the earth. And now what? Where does our curiosity take us? So thank you, Ismeta. And yeah, so now we're going to open it up for conversation, response. So feel free if you have a question, a comment, a response, just to unmute and jump in. So this is the free form part.
Jamie, thank you so much for creating this for today. It's so lovely to participate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paula, you were muted. You might
I
want to
just
repeat
was
what you
wondering
just
if I just wondered if I could get to the gallery, and then I did it. So question asked and answered.
Great. So there is a question in the chat. Yeah,
Oh,
please, Jamie, go ahead.
I was going to say, Victoria, there's a question in the chat for you. You're muted, Victoria.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The comment says, I showed up a little late, so if this was already covered, forgive me. I was curious about something Victoria said. In what ways can we learn the stories of the land we work with? How do you go about learning about that in relation to your own somatic practice? That's a great question. So yeah, I think there's a very integrative quality we can bring to this, not only using our like superpowers of sensitivity that somatic folks have to like devote that time to go out and listen as often as possible, you know, open that bridge of communication, but also an analytical presence, you know, really observing what are you seeing in the landscape. And like I was saying before, it does take some educational practice to learn, like, what am I seeing? Like, why is this plant here but not here? Why is this plant community here? Why is this area barren? Why does the water run in this way? So it really is also very questions based. And like what Paula was saying, let the curiosity open that door as wide as possible. And then kind of like I was referencing before, doing research, like, you know, finding out who are the local tribes who are still in that area. Do they have a headquarters? Are they willing to, do they do events? Do they talk about the history of that land there? Read books about the land there and what happened there, the stories of not only ecological changes on vast scales, like geological changes, but also on the human scale of history. Who are the different groups of people who've been moving through this place and what are their land connection practices like? I would say also plant names has been a huge thread of curiosity for me, learning, you know, why is this plant, you know, has this Latin name or a common name in English, but what is the indigenous name of that plant and why? Like that's going to probably tell you a lot more interesting information about that plant and how it has been harvested or other relationships with other species. And I know also with indigenous place names, a lot of times they may include the name of a plant in there because maybe at a certain point in time, that place was just so rich with that edible tuber, for example. And so we can learn a lot by saying, oh, how come that tuber isn't here anymore? Like, So yeah, thanks for that question. Obviously I could go on, but I'm curious to see if anybody has other input about that.
Charlie
Gayatri.
Simpson is at a library and can't speak back, but was thanking you for the response, in case you didn't see that. Yeah.
Cool.
Gayatri Maya's hand is up.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to, Victoria, when you were speaking about names, what I was remembering was when I went deep into receiving the intelligence of animals, what we call animals, and how we have put names on animals and plants. And when I asked the animals, some birds or four-leggeds, for what is your name? they were very different names than what I was habituated to. And so this is, it came up in response to your sharing. And it was such a marvelous time of insight, which for me goes into everything that I've received from you today, which is this willingness to listen and perceive outside of my habituation. And I also do somatic work with horses, and I loved so much to listen to Paula. And I remember coming to a horse, and I was going to work with this horse, and I was listening to how this was going to be. So this is groundwork. It's like somatic equine work. And the horse was like, "What? You don't want anything from me?" I was like, "No, I just want to offer you something if you would want it." They were like, "What?" Like shocked. So I am so moved by these conversations. And Jamie, that you have now the fourth conversation you're facilitating, and it's creating such richness. And I'm serving on the board of Ismeta, and I've done a lot of somatic practice, but I haven't done a lot of ecosomatic related things. But what I'm learning is that I have, thanks to you. So you're filling in that gap. So I just wanted to express my gratitude to all three of you who have been speaking, and to the event itself, and to just name in the space that I'm really touched that we're giving space for this. So thank you so much.
Yes, Lee, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm at the cafeteria in a hospital in New Brunswick, but it's after lunchtime, so it's quiet. Thank you very much. I love this collaboration, or the bringing together of ecology and the somatics. And I grew up on a farm, and had a very good teacher, my father, and understanding the animals and the earth, and water, ecology, wind, weather, and the tone of the animals. And that really, and my dance practice, and it really prepared me for working with Bonnie Cohen. And the reflexes that I learned working with horses and cattle, and applied perfectly to the reflexes that I studied with Bonnie, and it informed my work and enriched it profoundly. And so I'm overcome with joy. As we say here in the Shiak, which is half French, half English, no worry, Pa. So don't worry, I'm okay. This is joy and gratitude, and hearing what you're saying and how that reflects in my experience of working with people and animals, and in my classes with the human animals. I remind them all the time about how we are, the legs of the bone, or the dog, or the way the river is running and downhill, or the wind. And I remember Bonnie brought in Dr. Dandin, Tibetan medicine doctor, to the Dalai Lama. And we did a whole session on the 7 winds of Tibetan medicine, and how that deepened, and help me understand more and experiencing those 7 winds in the body. So this is a wonderful revolution that I'm hearing today of what we're doing. I'm a member of LinkedIn, but I've never really explained what I did because it seems so far off. But after from, so out there. But now today, after listening to you and us, this group, I'm going to go in and I'm going to fill my LinkedIn and talk about ecosomatics with a level of confidence and camaraderie that I was not feeling. And now I feel it very deeply today. And thank you very much in sharing in that wisdom. Excellent. Thank you.
Mm. 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 Thank you, Lee. That was very touching, and I appreciate that you feel the support of this community behind you to step out in this other way. And yeah, it's beautiful.
As I find it is meant to be an exceptional organization, I'm very proud to be part of. And then this chapter right here today, it brings it just, it's not that it closes a circle, but it enlarges it. And yes, thank you.
So Jamie, there's a question from Karen in the chat. And I know there's a lot to track there. If you'd like, I can read it out loud if that would be helpful. Okay. Karen says, I'd rather not speak to, but would love to hear more about fear that touches the survival responses and then acted out in control. Then acted out in control. I see it in the world, but know it in me too. And I'm both drawn to and terrified of horses. Thank you.
I can respond to that a little bit. Karen, what I understand particularly about working with horses is how quickly that survival physiology can come into play. When there is something that frightens them or startles them, could be a sound, it could be movement. I think I also know it from my own body, my own system, the quickness and the kind of the fieriness of that survival physiology, which can become chronic, can become a kind of default state, where we have a really well-defined danger map, really well plotted, lots of roads, lots of familiarity with the markers of that, and not a lot of access to safety. What I have experienced in working with a human and a horse together with those who have experienced trauma and for whom the survival physiology is dominant, is that they can help us just with their presence. And again, this is a meticulously titrated practice. It's not something that you take a deep dive into. It's really titrated, that they can help us to begin to unravel some of those responses when we are in this place of cultivating and nourishing of a sense of a listening consciousness, an attunement and relational consciousness. I've experienced this in myself, I've experienced it with students and clients over and over and over and over again. So that would be a beginning of an answer. A beginning of an answer. Or a response, not an answer.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. I'm really moved, actually, and on two levels: on a personal recognition of someone who's a bit more out of what you could beautifully describe as a physiology, and also what you're speaking to is what I know maybe all our nervous systems are longing for, that attunement, that kind of I work often with children that have been through an enormous amount, and yet I know it when anybody's in real difficulty or not, that what we're longing for is someone to be with us.
Yeah.
And that's what comes through in your, and then that in me that forgets that that's enough, when that actually is
Yeah.
it, on probably what a great deal of our world needs, but also what nature needs. It's
Yeah.
like the more we attune and listen and attune, and whether it's to a dandelion or a horse or a human being, if we all treated each other like that, then actually, wow, would we need the war and the control that we're witnessing? So thank you for speaking, and thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Victoria, you may have seen a question in the chat from Stephen Gunt. I'm happy to read it out loud if that would help.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Question for Victoria. How do you thread the sometimes tricky line between cultural appreciation / education and cultural appropriation? Really appreciate your willingness to include Indigenous perspectives in your own thinking without just like stealing songs or stories or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And definitely something that's still a work in progress. Like, I don't think I have a correct answer, but I do feel, once again, it requires a great deal of care and thoughtfulness, and to something all of us are obligated to do, especially because we are working in a healing realm, and considering, like I've mentioned before, the theft of land, but also laws that prohibited ceremonial and spiritual practices of Indigenous people. That it is it is a mistake to take something without acknowledging that, there's a lot of privilege wrapped up in that. So I think with people who, it's a natural phenomenon to migrate around to different places. And that I also feel there's a sense of obligation to learn about the place you're arriving in for whatever reason, and not just kind of copy and paste your own ways, because the landscape is different. The stories of that place are different. There's a history there that needs to be understood. And then letting yourself become more like the place without saying that you're Indigenous to that place, and that you have your own ancestral history, that you want to honor it and bring it in, but find that path of integration, but also foregrounding deep respect. And like I said before, I think it's probably a nuanced case by case thing. I know a lot of folks are given permission, like I studied with so and so shaman, and they said I could share this teaching, but it still wants to be taken into account. There's a context. That's really what ecology teaches me. There's a context for everything. And so certain stories may not make total sense in in a subtler society of occupation, like there may be threads there that we can really learn from, but our minds may not grasp the totality of what the story could teach. Yeah. There's more I could say, but I'll pause there.
I have a thought.
I actually thought of something I would like to, I also think that as somatic practitioners, it's well worth our time to look deeper into the lineage of somatics and the name somatics. And if anybody's interested, I read a really interesting article by Lindsay Drury, I think is her name, about this whole process of kind of, taking a lot of lineages, actual lineages with teachers from Japan and Haiti and India, and thinking of them as influences to the field, but not progenitors of the field. And that, I think, is very fascinating. And that, is another example of revising history to suit a more Eurocentric approach. So it just needs to be questioned. And I also want to connect this back to the previous question about fear, that talking about this might bring up like a charged feeling for folks. And that is in similarly what Paula was talking about, like, that there are ways to build capacity to really study the nervous system responses to these kinds of topics, and that's necessary work.
I was struck by your comment about, let's build a wall and disregard the plants that exist in a space. And I was really, it brought me back to two experiences I've had. I remember when I was much younger visiting a friend whose home was built in this odd lot that had lots of trees, and there's a beautiful large tree in the middle of the lot that she opted not to tear down, and she built her home around the tree. And it appeared healthy. The big beautiful leaves above her house was built with glass so that you could actually see the trunk of the tree growing up through, and with room for the tree to continue growing. And then I work at a campus in Austin where there are a lot of older trees there, and I was really intrigued by looking back and trying to just retroactively witness the movement of the trees through the growth patterns, and I was really struck with where things were built and how that affected the growth patterns of the trees seeking the sun. And it struck me, and I found myself, I was depressed when I was really contemplating this, by you build a wall and you starve the tree of its sun and you force it. What kind of trauma does the tree feel trying to grow at such a horizontal angle to try to just grab some sun to continue living, when we've built a wall? And obviously they were trying to build around the existing trees and not tear them down, but it was still built in such a way that the tree was forced to make these I'd imagine from a tree's perspective, somewhat painful contortions in order to survive. What resources do we have for builders? I mean, builders, they're concerned with function of a space, and architects who are concerned primarily with the human experience of a space. What resources do we have for education of these groups to factor in the experience of the trees, of the plants that are there? I mean, just curious if you've encountered that or have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great points. I think education is the key word, and like you're saying, architecture folks may not have the education about ecology, or what plants' needs are or animals' needs are. It is very human centric, and like we have needs and we need to meet our needs. But for example, like Little Blue Stem collaborates with some of the folks who are in the landscape architect program at UVA, And I think that is a great step in the right direction to expose the landscape architecture people, at least if not all architecture people, to more of these ecological principles, to sort of like chip away at this idea that it has to be such a human-centric field.
Can I just add to that, Joseph, your question also provokes the other side of this, which is the usurpation of land that was used by the wild horses in the West, particularly by ranchers who are raising beef cattle on the land and displacing all of these, so we say indigenous herds. So it's all around us, for sure.
Elizabeth, I'm aware that we are at time. Would you like to close out this session for us?
Happily, thank you. Again, I just offer a bow of gratitude for the offerings that you each have brought. Jamie, for holding this thread over many months, and Paula and Victoria for cultivating your own important ecosomatic work in the world and sharing it with us here today. We look forward to ongoing conversations. And Jamie, if you have a date for the next one that you'd like to share now, we can close on that note. And if you don't, we can send it out in our newsletter. And I have provided the link to that in the chat if there are people on the call who do not receive our newsletter yet and want to. The link is there for you. That's the best way to stay updated on upcoming ecosomatic events that Jamie offers and others as well. And there is a professional development center that we have just recently launched, and we hope to see many more events, podcasts, episodes, and others related to this vitally important theme there in the Professional Development Center. Thank you.
And once again, before we close, if you want, if you go down to the bottom of the chat and the 3 dots, if you click on there, you can save the chat, which has all of the resources from this conversation, links, etc., etc. And once again, thank you, Elizabeth and Ismeta, for hosting this wonderful and stimulating conversation. It kind of keeps me on my toes as I continue bringing the focus out in the world. And so thank you. And thank you all for showing up and the generosity of your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.